The farm girl who heard the silence. The corridor was not on any map she had ever seen. 40 feet long, concrete walls painted industrial gray, the kind of gray that says this place was built for function, not for comfort. Pipes ran along the ceiling in tight bundles, copper steel, black rubber, insulation wrapped around the joints. The air smelled like coolant and recycled oxygen, and something faintly electric, the way the air smells just before lightning hits. Ellie Carson stood at the entrance to that corridor and did not move. Behind the glass wall to her left, 200 people had stopped breathing. Screens painted their faces in cold blue light. A countdown clock on the main display read 3 seconds, then 2. Her right hand found the junction panel by feel alone. She did not look at it. She had been in the dark long enough that looking did not help anymore. She ran her fingertips along the terminal rows the way her father had taught her to read irrigation manifolds before dawn, not by sight but by texture, by spacing, by the small physical logic of how things are built. Her fingers stopped. Blue terminals, a cluster of 8. She counted them twice. 1 second. She pulled every connection simultaneously. The corridor lights flickered once like a long, slow blink. The countdown alarm changed pitch, a descending tone, almost musical, like a question being withdrawn. Then the sound died entirely. The hum of the facility dropped a register. The vibration in the floor changed frequency, barely perceptible, the way a held breath is different from a stopped one. Silence. Not the absence of sound, the presence of something else. Stillness that had weight to it. The kind of quiet that follows a very close call and knows it. Captain Colt Navarre stood 3 feet behind her. His radio crackled. The voice that came through belonged to Delia Foss. "Sir." The countdown stopped. Navarre did not answer immediately. He was looking at the back of Ellie's head, at the way she had not moved yet, at the way she was standing perfectly still, with both hands against the open panel, her head tilted slightly, attending to something in the air of the corridor that he could not identify and was not sure he would ever be able to identify. At what he finally said into the radio, a pause from Foss. "0, sir." But the reset did not engage. Navarre looked at the small woman in front of him, 26 years old, canvas work pants, a denim jacket with a frayed left cuff, boots that still had soil in the tread from a greenhouse she had walked out of 8 hours ago without expecting to walk into anything like this. He thought about what she had said to him in the elevator 3 minutes ago running. He had not known what to do with it then. He knew slightly more now, and it was still not enough. How he said. Ellie let out a slow breath. Her right hand was still pressed against the panel. She did not answer him right away. She said, "My father would have known before it got this far." Then she turned around and Navarre saw that she was holding her right wrist against her side at a careful angle. She had not mentioned it. She would not mention it for another 40 minutes. And when someone finally noticed and told her she needed to see the medic, she would say after, in the same tone she used for everything else, calm, factual, without drama. But that was still 40 minutes away. Right now, it was 6:53 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, and a 26-year-old woman who grew tomatoes and basil for a living had just saved a classified military installation that she had not known existed before 9 o'clock the previous morning. This is the story of how she got there. Rewind 8 hours. Millbrook Valley, Washington, 40 miles from the nearest highway exit that shows up on a gas station map. The valley sits in a fold of the Cascade foothills that most people drive past without noticing. There is a 2-lane road that cuts through it. On one side, forest. On the other side, a cluster of glass structures that catch the early light in a way that looks almost accidental. It's almost beautiful in the way of thing that was built entirely for function sometimes ends up being beautiful anyway. Ellie Carson had been running those greenhouses since she was 22 years old. Not running them as a figure of speech, running them the way a person runs a thing when there is no one else to do it. And the alternative is watching something her family built over 3 generations die quietly from neglect. 40,000 square feet of controlled environment, 5 climate zones, tomatoes, peppers, leafy greens, herbs. Produce contracts with 18 restaurants and 4 regional grocery chains. Year-round operation, no pesticides, 90% less water than field agriculture. She managed it alone. A part-time employee during peak season, a neighbor who checked the overnight alerts when she had to make a supply run to Yakima. Otherwise alone. That had been the arrangement for 4 years. Her father, Tom Carson, had died on a Wednesday in November. Black ice on Route 97, 2 miles from the farm. He had been coming home from a consulting job in Portland, one of the last ones he had promised. He had been promising that for a long time. He was 51 years old. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. Ellie did not think about that morning often. She had found that thinking about it did not change anything and cost something she could not afford to spend. What she thought about instead was the farm, the crop schedules, the moisture readings. The way certain varieties of basil responded to a half-degree shift in overnight temperature in a way that the sensors did not catch, but that the color of the leaves told you plainly if you knew how to look. Her father had taught her to look. That was the thing about Tom Carson. He was an engineer by training, and he had worked in a world of instruments and data and calibrated systems for his entire career. But he had grown up on this farm the same as she had, and he had never lost the habit, the old habit, the one that predates every instrument ever built of trusting what his body told him before he trusted what the readout said. Listen to the building before you read the data, he used to say. He said it so often that it became the kind of thing you stop hearing as a saying and just absorb as a fact, the way you absorb the smell of soil or the particular sound rain makes on glass roofing at 3 in the morning. Buildings do not lie. Instruments do. She had been 22 when he died, and she had been standing in Greenhouse 3 checking the basil. She had felt something wrong in the air before her phone rang. She had always believed that was her imagination. She had never been entirely sure. That was 4 years ago. She was 26 now, and she had kept every promise she had made at his grave, except the one she had made to herself about sleeping more than 5 hours before the early harvest check. There had been one other promise, a different kind. He had asked her for it directly about a month before he died. They were sitting on the tailgate of the old Silverado after a long afternoon moving irrigation lines. The sun was going down behind the western ridge, and the light was the color of the inside of a peach, and her father was quiet in the way he got quiet when something was sitting on him. "Ellie," he said, "that world, the federal contract work, the clearance buildings, the facilities with no addresses. I was good at it, I know that, but it took me away from here for 15 years. Away from your mother, away from you, and I am not sure it gave back what it cost. So I need you to promise me something." She had looked at him. She had known him well enough to know when he was being serious, and when he was being serious in the way that meant he would remember what she said next. "Stay on the farm," he said. "Whatever comes up, whatever they ask, stay on the farm," she had promised. Her mother, Ruth Carson, 58 years old, living in a house in Ellensburg with a heart condition she managed carefully and a tendency to worry about Ellie in a quiet, constant way that expressed itself as phone calls at 7 in the morning. Her mother was the second reason Ellie had kept that promise without difficulty. Until 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, the basil in Greenhouse 3 had started showing stress indicators that Ellie could not explain. Leaf curl, color shifts along the margins, a particular kind of wilting that was not a water problem or a nutrient problem or a light spectrum problem. She had checked all three. It was a temperature stress signature, subtle, inconsistent, the kind that does not show up clean on the monitoring graphs because it comes and goes. She had spent 2 weeks ruling out every internal cause. When she was finished ruling out internal causes, she began looking externally. This was something her father had also taught her. When a closed system behaves unpredictably, look for what the system is not accounting for. The outside variable. The thing that changed. What had changed 6 weeks ago was the air. Specifically, the exhaust pattern coming from the low ridge to the northeast 2.5 miles out. There was a facility back there. She knew it existed, the way local people always know. Something exists without knowing what it is. An industrial-looking access road. No signage. A utility corridor that had gone in years before she was old enough to pay attention to such things. Her father had mentioned it once obliquely in the way he mentioned certain things that he was not at liberty to discuss directly. She had not asked questions then. She asked questions now. She pulled an anemometer off the shelf in the equipment shed and spent 3 mornings before dawn tracking the airflow patterns across the valley. The readings were clear. Something back there had changed its exhaust output 6 weeks ago. The thermal signature of the air reaching her greenhouses had shifted. Not drastically. Fractionally, but fractionally in a closed growing environment was enough. She filed a complaint with the Catitas County Environmental Services Office on a Thursday morning. She was polite, specific, and thorough. She included her anemometer readings, her crop stress documentation, and a 2-page summary she typed out the night before at the kitchen table. 3 weeks of silence followed. Then a phone call, not from the county, a different voice official in a way that was different from county official, smoother and more careful. The man on the phone said her complaint had been referred to a federal environmental review office and that a brief consultation had been arranged. He gave her an address. He told her the meeting would take approximately 1 hour. She asked what kind of facility it was. He said he was not able to discuss that over the phone, but that it would be explained when she arrived. She almost said no. She had the word ready. She was holding it in her mouth already shaped when she looked out the window at Greenhouse 3 and saw the basil. Still stressed, still wrong. She said she would be there at 9. She told her mother she had a meeting with the county about a permit issue. She did not elaborate. She was in the truck before she finished convincing herself this was a reasonable decision. The access road went back through the trees for almost 2 miles before it reached a gate. A guard checked her name against a list on a tablet, confirmed her identity, twice issued her a temporary clearance badge on a lanyard, and told her to follow the vehicle in front of her. The vehicle was an unmarked SUV that drove with the particular authority of a vehicle that never worries about speed limits. She followed it to an entrance built into the rock face of the ridge. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a reinforced doorway wide enough for trucks set into a concrete surround that had been landscaped with the same kinds of scrub brush and young pine that grew on the ridge above it. Someone had thought about the appearance from above. Satellite coverage. She filed that observation away without examining it too closely. Inside the hallway sloped downward. Ellie Carson walked into the Iron Spine Tactical Operations Center at 9:14 in the morning, carrying nothing but her clearance badge and a folded piece of paper with her anemometer readings because she had not known what else to bring, and the readings were why she was here. The main operations floor was the size of a large gymnasium, except that every surface was doing something. Screens covered the far wall in a mosaic of data weather patterns, air traffic corridors, moving icons that she did not have the context to identify. Rows of workstations curved in gentle arcs facing the main display. The light was blue-tinted and low-designed for screen visibility rather than human comfort. 200 people approximately. She would not know the precise number until later. 200 specialists, 3 states, 73 satellite feeds, quantum processors she had no frame of reference for and did not need one. She stood at the entrance to that floor, and before she did anything else, she simply stood still. Every large system has a rhythm. A greenhouse has one. A farm has one. Even a forest has one. If you spend enough time in it, you stop hearing the individual sounds and start hearing the structure underneath. The frequency of things. The pulse. This room had a pulse. And within 30 seconds of standing at its entrance, Ellie Carson knew the pulse was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not broken, slightly off. The way a timing belt sounds before it fails. The way a pump sounds 3 days before it stops. A rhythm doing what it was supposed to do, but doing it with a small and irregular effort that should not have been there. She almost said something. She did not. She had been here 45 seconds. She filed the observation in the same place she filed everything in the part of her mind that her father had called the back pasture, the quiet space where you keep things that are not ready to be said yet, but are too important to let go. General Garrett Wynn came down from the elevated observation platform. He was 54 years old, wide across the shoulders, with the particular bearing of a man who had been making decisions with permanent consequences for long enough that the weight of it had settled into his posture and become invisible. He moved like a man who did not hurry and did not need to. He extended his hand. Miss Carson, thank you for coming. I understand you have some concerns about our facility's environmental output. She shook his hand. Her grip was not measured. It was the grip of someone who had been moving irrigation equipment since she was 14 years old. I have some concerns about my basil, she said. That is what I have concerns about. Whatever your facility is doing, it started 6 weeks ago, and it has been killing my greenhouse crops since then. She was not trying to be difficult. She was being precise. She had found in her experience that precision saved time. Wynn held her gaze for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. She had said something he had not expected. Behind him, Colonel Brett Briggs had not moved from his position at the edge of the platform. He was 46 years old, medium height, with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are always the most professionally skeptical person in any room. His arms were crossed. He had been watching Ellie since she walked in. She had noticed him noticing her. She had not done anything about it. I appreciate your directness, Wynn said. He gestured toward a row of stations near the center of the floor. Doctor, Hale's team has reviewed the ventilation data. We believe the changes you observed are within normal operational variance. If you could walk us through your specific readings. The readings are in my jacket pocket, Ellie said. But before we look at numbers, can I ask you something? He paused. Sure, how long have you had the pattern fluctuations? Wynne looked at Delia Foss, who was at the nearest workstation. Foss was 34, efficient, with the expression of someone who processed large amounts of information quickly and preferred accuracy to social comfort. She glanced at Ellie, then at the general. Approximately 6 weeks, Foss said. And they started small, Ellie said. Barely measurable. Getting a little worse every few days. Neither Wynne nor Foss spoke. And they change based on time of day, Ellie said. The fluctuations are different in the morning than in the afternoon. Not random, rhythmic. The room went quiet in a specific way. The kind of quiet that happens when a large number of people simultaneously decide not to make a sound. How could you possibly know that Foss said it was not quite a question? Because the same thing happened in my greenhouse, Ellie said. 3 years ago. Different cause, same shape. Briggs stepped down from the platform. He walked toward Ellie with the measured pace of someone who had made a professional assessment and was now going to act on it. He stopped 6 feet away. General, he did not look at Ellie when he said it. I need to flag a concern, noted Wynne said. This is a Tier 1 classified facility. This individual was admitted for a consultation, not a diagnostic briefing. She has no clearance level appropriate for operational data discussion. I would recommend we take her readings, thank her for her time, and arrange for the county environmental office to follow up formally. He was correct. Every word of it was procedurally accurate. There was no malice in it and no contempt. He was doing his job the way it was supposed to be done. Ellie did not react to it. She had heard versions of this before, not in military language, but the underlying structure was the same. The polite, procedurally valid version of, you do not belong here and everything you think you know is smaller than everything we already know. She had learned not to argue with that structure. She simply continued to do what she had come to do. Captain Colt Navarre had been standing near the secondary access corridor when Ellie walked in. He was 31 angular, with the careful observation habits of someone who had been trained to notice things other people missed and had never quite been able to turn that training off. He had been assigned to escort duty, keeping track of the visitor, making sure she stayed where she was supposed to stay. He watched her now. She had moved away from the introductory cluster and was walking slowly along the edge of the operations floor, her hands loose at her sides, her eyes moving upward to the cable runs along the ceiling, the arrangement of the cooling vents, the physical infrastructure. Not at the data, at the building itself. She was moving the way a person moves when they are reading something. Navarre followed her. You have been changing things, Ellie said. She said it to no one specifically, to the general space of the room. Wynne looked at her from across the floor. I am sorry. Something came online recently, something large, changed the load on your systems. That is classified, Wynne said. But it did, Ellie said. She was not accusing. She was not guessing. She sounded like a farmer who had looked at the color of a leaf and identified a mineral deficiency, stating a diagnosis. Then she stopped walking. She had stopped near the western wall where glass panels allowed a view through to the equipment space beyond. The cooling units, the ductwork, the infrastructure that kept all of this running. She tilted her head at a fraction. Her eyes moved to the ductwork above the western wall, not to the displays reporting what the ductwork was doing, to the ductwork itself, the physical runs, the joints, the places where the new installation met the old. Navarre stopped beside her. What are you looking at? He said quietly. She said, can you feel the floor here? He looked down. He stood still for a moment, actively attending to it. There was a vibration. Small. He had been feeling it since he came on shift and had not consciously registered it as something to pay attention to. Yeah, he said. It is different in this section than it is over there, she said. She gestured without pointing, a general indication toward the far side of the floor. The resonance is wrong for the size of the space. Something changed the pressure dynamics in the ductwork, and nobody has recalibrated for it. Navarre did not know what to say to that. Wynne crossed the floor toward them. Miss Carson, I appreciate your instincts, but we have a team of highly qualified engineers who... Your cooling system, Ellie said. When was the last time it was upgraded? The room went quiet again. From the station nearest to them, Foss said quietly, without looking up. 6 weeks ago. New liquid cooling array for the processor expansion. Ellie nodded once. The way she nodded when a sensor reading confirmed something she had already believed. The alarm went off. Not a dramatic alarm. 2 soft tones, the kind that would be easy to dismiss if you had not been trained to hear them. But Foss's face changed immediately. Her hands went to her keyboard, and she was pulling up source code before the second tone finished. Sir, she said it without turning. We have a synchronization error in the primary satellite array. Wynne moved to her station. Define error. Telemetry feed from bird 7 is delayed by 0.003 seconds. She paused. Now bird 3 and bird 11 are showing the same lag. Wynne looked at his chief engineer. Dr. Victor Hale was 52 years old, methodical, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who lived primarily in the space between a problem and its solution. He had come onto the floor 20 minutes after Ellie arrived, reviewed the environmental complaint file, and spent most of the time since watching her the way a careful person watches something they have not yet been able to categorize. Hardware, Wynne asked him. Hale checked. Hardware checks out perfect, he said slowly. No atmospheric interference, no solar activity. The satellites themselves are functioning normally. He paused. It is our receiving equipment, but the equipment diagnostics are clean. From a station at the back, Lieutenant Jake Duran called out ground radar showing intermittent tracking loss. Western sector, 4 times in the last 2 minutes. Duration is in milliseconds, but it is consistent. Wynne stood at the center of his operations floor. He had run this facility for 6 years. He had trained for every category of failure he could anticipate and some he could not. He was a man built for crisis. He turned toward Ellie Carson. She had not moved from where she was standing near the western wall. Her arms were loose at her sides. Her head was tilted at that same slight angle. What do you think you are hearing, Miss Carson? It was the first time he had asked her a question instead of managing her. She looked at him. Your new cooling system changed the temperature gradient in this facility, she said. That changed how air moves through the ducts. That created pressure variations that are affecting your sensors in ways your diagnostic programs are not catching because the variations are too small and too specific to trip the error thresholds. Each sensor reading affects the next calculation. Each calculation feeds into the next system. Small errors compound. They do not stay small. Hale had gone still. That is speculation, Briggs said from across the room. Calmly, procedurally correct. Hale said slowly, no, it is actually a valid hypothesis. Look at the error distribution, Hale said. He highlighted sections on his screen. The pattern is not random. We have been treating it as noise. It is not noise. It is signal. Briggs walked across the floor. He stopped beside Wynne and spoke at a volume that was meant to be private. General, I need you to consider the security implications of continuing this consultation. An unauthorized civilian is now effectively participating in a diagnostic review of the main display went red. All of it simultaneously. Every screen on the operations floor changed color in the same instant, the way a sky changes color before a serious storm all at once without warning, with the particular quality of something that has been building for a longer time and has finally decided to stop waiting. The alert tone that followed was not two soft chimes. It filled the room. Foss's voice cut through it, cascading system failure. Multiple arrays reporting critical errors. Satellites, radar communications, everything is starting to desynchronize. Hale was already at his engineering console. Because they are all using the same quantum clock as a reference. If the clock itself is being affected, then every system is measuring time slightly differently. Ellie said it quietly into the noise. Then every system is wrong. The room turned, not all at once, but person by person in the space of about 4 seconds. The people in that room shifted their attention from their screens to the woman standing near the western wall in a frayed denim jacket with mud on her boots. Wynne looked at her. She looked back at him. Steady, not triumphant, not afraid. The expression of someone who had been attending to something for 40 minutes and had arrived at a conclusion she had not wanted to be right about. Tell me what you need, Wynne said. Briggs said, General, tell me what you need, Wynne said again. To her. She looked at the operations floor, at the screens, at the people behind them, at the ductwork through the glass panels, at the floor still vibrating with that particular wrong frequency. She said, you need to shut off the sensors. The room went very quiet. On the main display above the cascade of red alerts and conflicting data readouts, a new element appeared. A countdown. 60 seconds. Below it, in clean white text against red, automated defense protocol engaged. All systems entering secure mode. Ellie read it. Her expression did not change. She said, we need to move now. She had been walking toward the secondary corridor before she finished the sentence, and Navarre had already moved to cut the angle toward the maintenance access door, and neither of them had been told to do this by anyone in the room, which meant that something had passed between them in the preceding 40 minutes that neither of them had articulated and both of them had understood. But she stopped at the corridor entrance and looked back. She looked at the hallway that ran along the far wall of the operations floor. The historical display case set into the wall visible from where she stood. She had passed it on the way in 90 minutes ago. She had almost kept walking. She had not kept walking. The display case held photographs and framed commendations and a mounted bronze plaque with the names of civilian contractors who had contributed to the facility's construction and early systems development. The plaque was organized by decade. The 1990s section read T. Carson Environmental Systems Consultant 1997 to 2001. She stood there for 2 seconds. 2 seconds when there were 53 left on the countdown was not nothing. It was a choice. She made it. She turned back toward the corridor. Navarre was watching her. He had seen her look at the plaque. He had seen what happened to her face when she read the name. He did not say anything. He held the door. She went through it. Part 2. The promise and the blueprint. 60 seconds is not very long. Most people understand this in the abstract. They have stood in lines that lasted longer. They have waited at traffic lights that cost them more time. 60 seconds in the ordinary math of a day is nothing. But 60 seconds in a room where 200 people have just watched every screen turn red simultaneously, where a countdown is running that none of them can stop, where the system they have spent their careers building and trusting has just declared itself compromised and begun the process of locking them inside it. 60 seconds. In that room is a different unit of measurement entirely. It is geological. It has mass. The countdown read 57 when General Garrett Wynn turned to Dr. Victor Hale. "Talk to me." Hale was already at his engineering console, both hands on the keyboard, pulling up architecture diagrams that bloomed across his secondary screen in branching networks of interconnected systems. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who is translating panic into precision in real time and cannot afford to let either one dominate. "Secure mode is a fail-safe protocol," Hale said. "If the system determines there has been a critical compromise, internal or external, it initiates a full lockdown. Wipes all temporary operational data to prevent infiltration. Cuts primary power to non-essential systems to force a cold restart." Wynn said define non-essential. Life support, communications, door locks, everything that is not core defense infrastructure. Navarre said quietly from across the floor, "How long until those systems come back online?" "Minimum 4 hours. Possibly 8. 214 people in a facility buried inside a granite ridge. No external communications. Sealed doors. 4 to 8 hours minimum." Wynn said, "Can we override it?" Hale did not answer immediately. That pause was its own answer. "That is the point of the protocol," Hale said. "It cannot be overridden. It was designed that way. If the system can be overridden during a compromise event, the override itself becomes an attack vector." 51 seconds. Ellie had been listening to all of this from near the western wall. She was not watching the countdown. She was watching the room, the way the energy in it had shifted from controlled urgency to something with more edges, something beginning to move too fast in too many directions. She recognized this. A greenhouse in full cascade failure looked different from this, but it felt the same. The particular quality of a system trying to correct itself with bad information, each correction making the next one harder. She said, "You need to stop trying to stop it." The people nearest to her turned. She said, "Every input you are giving it right now looks like an attack. You designed it that way. You designed it to ignore human interference during a high-stress compromise event, because human interference during a compromise event is exactly what an attacker would do. So every time someone at a terminal tries to correct the system interprets that as confirmation that it is under attack. You are not fighting the problem. You are feeding it." Hale was looking at her with an expression that had moved past skepticism into something more uncomfortable. The expression of a man who is hearing something that contradicts everything he built and finding that he cannot immediately identify where the contradiction is wrong. 44 seconds. "So we do nothing," Navarre said from near the maintenance door. He was not being dismissive. He was asking a real question. "We stopped doing the wrong thing," Ellie said. "But, those are not the same." Wynn said, "What is the right thing, the sensors?" Ellie said, "You need to isolate the system from the sensors. The sensors are what started this. The sensors are giving it bad data. Every decision the system is making right now, including the decision to lock down, is based on bad environmental data fed through a cooling configuration that should not exist in this building. If you remove the bad data, the system has nothing to react to." Hale said, "We would need to disable the entire environmental monitoring network." "Yes." He shook his head. "If we disable the sensors, the system will interpret that as sabotage. Disabling sensors is exactly what an attacker does before compromising a facility." 38 seconds. Briggs had been standing near the secondary command station. He had been watching the countdown, watching Wynn, watching Ellie. He was a man who processed information quickly and acted on it with the confidence of someone who had been right more often than he had been wrong and who had learned to trust that record. He walked to Wynn's position. He said, "General, I need to invoke Sierra." Wynn looked at him. "Sierra Protocol," Briggs said. "Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Iron Spine Operational Security Framework. In the event of an active compromise situation where command judgment may be impaired by the presence of unauthorized personnel, the senior security officer may temporarily assume operational authority for the duration of the threat event." He was correct. Every word of it was accurate. The protocol existed for exactly this kind of situation, a high-stress environment, an uncleared civilian in direct contact with the commanding general, a cascading system failure with no clear cause and no clear solution. Wynn said, "Brett, the protocol exists for a reason, sir." 30 seconds. Wynn looked at the countdown, at his operations floor, at 200 people whose faces were turned toward him with the particular quality of attention that people give to the person they expect to make a decision. Then he looked at Ellie Carson. She was already looking at him. Her expression was not pleading. It was not urgent in the performed way that urgency usually presents itself. She was still. The way the floor of a greenhouse is still at 4 in the morning when you stand in it before dawn and the whole building is breathing around you and you are the only person in it who can hear what it needs. She said, "General, you brought me here because something was wrong. You knew your systems were not telling you the truth before I walked in this morning. That is why my county complaint got referred upward instead of dismissed. Someone in this building already suspected the instruments were lying. Trust that instinct." 22 seconds. Briggs said, "General, I am formally invoking Sierra Protocol. I need your acknowledgement." 20 seconds. Wynn closed his eyes. One breath, opened them. He said to Briggs, "Acknowledged." Then he said to Ellie, "Tell me how to give the system what it needs to stand down." Briggs said, "General." Wynn said, "Brett, you have the con in 4 minutes if this does not work. Right now I am making a command decision." Step back. The silence between those two men lasted 1 second. It carried the weight of 6 years of professional trust in one genuine irreconcilable disagreement about how much risk a person was permitted to accept on behalf of 200 others. Briggs stepped back. 15 seconds. Ellie said, "You cannot do it from here. The software will block any attempt to disable the sensors through the terminals because any terminal input right now looks like an attack. You need to do it physically. Hardware level. The sensors run through a physical junction network. If you disconnect them at the hardware level, the system receives what it interprets as a simultaneous environmental baseline of 0. Not an attack, not a disruption. 0, a clean slate. And a clean slate does not confirm a threat." Hale said the main sensor junction. Sublevel 2 East Maintenance Corridor, Panel East 7. Navarre was already moving. He crossed the operations floor in 8 steps, reached the maintenance access door, and looked back. Ellie was right behind him. 12 seconds. Briggs said formally and clearly to the room, "For the record, I am objecting to this course of action on security grounds." The door closed. The maintenance corridor was not built for speed. It was built for access, the minimum width necessary for a technician with tools to navigate it, the minimum lighting necessary to read panel markings. Pipes ran overhead. The grill flooring rang under their boots with each step. Navarre was speaking into his radio. Hale's voice came back clipped and precise. 50 feet ahead. Panel marked EC7. You will need the access code. What is it? 794, Delta 35. Navarre repeated it without writing it down. Behind him, Ellie was keeping pace without difficulty. She moved through this corridor with a specific quality of confidence that he had noticed and was now revising his understanding of. It was not the confidence of someone who had been trained for this environment and in an environment. It was different, more fundamental. It was the confidence of someone who recognized the architecture. She had not hesitated at a single junction. 40 feet, 30. The corridor branched left. She went left without breaking stride. Navarre said, "How do you know where you are going?" She did not answer immediately. Her boots rang on the grill. The pipes overhead hissed softly. She said, "My father drew this corridor for me when I was 12 years old, on a flour sack. The paper kind, the old kind, the kind that is thick enough to write on. He used a ballpoint pen and he drew it from memory because he was not allowed to bring the blueprints home." Navarre processed this while running. He said, "Your father worked here. He built the ventilation system," she said. "The original one. He was 29 years old and it was the first major federal contract he ever won, and he said it was the best work he ever did. He was proud of it, the way engineers are proud of things that work quietly and last a long time, and that nobody ever notices because they never fail. She said, he told me about every junction, every access panel, every load-bearing decision, every place where he made a choice between the elegant solution and the practical one, and why he chose what he chose. He drew it out on that flour sack over about 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon while I sat on the tailgate and asked him questions. Navarre said, you memorized it. She said, I was 12. I had nothing better to do. And he was my father. When he talked about his work, I listened. 20 feet. She said the new cooling system was installed inside the infrastructure he built. That is why it is wrong. The original system was designed for specific airflow dynamics in these corridors. The new installation changed those dynamics without accounting for what was already here. My father's ventilation logic and the new cooling efficiency logic are fighting each other inside every duct in this building. Navarre said, and you knew that because of a drawing on a flour sack. She said I knew it because of 30 years of being taught to pay attention. The drawing just told me where to go. They reached the panel, EC7. Gray metal face approximately 3 feet by 4 feet mounted flush to the corridor wall with a keypad lock on the right side. Behind it, Navarre knew was the physical network connecting every environmental sensor in the facility to the central processing array. His fingers found the keypad, 794 Delta 35. The panel swung open. Inside were dozens of terminal connections and color-coded clusters. Red, yellow, green, blue. The blue cluster was the largest, running in 2 rows of 8 at the center of the board, with cable bundles thick as rope leading into the wall in both directions. Navarre looked at it. He said, which ones are environmental? Hale's voice on the radio, blue terminals. But if you disconnect them manually without a staged shutdown sequence, the system will interpret. Ellie said, I know what it will interpret. Her right hand went to the blue terminal cluster. She looked at Navarre. He reached for his radio. General Wynn, we are at EC7, requesting authorization to disconnect the environmental terminal array. The radio was quiet for 2 seconds. Then Wynn's voice. Authorization granted. Do it. Ellie pulled. She pulled all 8 connections in the top row simultaneously with her right hand, and then she was already reaching for the bottom row. The corridor was dark enough that she was working by feel, by the memory of a 12-year-old girl sitting on a tailgate on a Sunday afternoon learning the physical logic of a building that would not need her for another 14 years. The bottom row came away in her left hand. All 8, and for 1 fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the corridor lights flickered. The countdown alarm changed pitch, that descending tone, that question being withdrawn. Then silence. Navarre held very still. The radio crackled. Delia Foss said, sir. The countdown stopped. Navarre exhaled. He became aware in the stillness that Ellie had not moved since she pulled the connections. She was standing with her back to him, both hands against the open panel. He could see the set of her shoulders, the controlled stillness of someone who is managing something physical and choosing not to show it. He said, you need medical. She said, after. He looked at the way she was holding her right arm, the angle of the wrist, the careful stillness of it. He did not push it. He said, you knew that would work. She was quiet for a moment. The facility breathed around them differently now. The wrong frequency in the floor, resolving slowly the way a chord comes back into tune. She said, I knew it was the right logic. Logic and outcome are not always the same thing. He said, but you did it anyway. She said, my father spent 20 years building things he believed in. Some of them worked and some of them did not, but he built them all with the same care. He taught me that you cannot always know if the thing you are doing is going to work. You can only know if it is the right thing to try doing. She turned around. Her right wrist was held at a careful angle against her side. She was not cradling it. She was not making anything of it. She was simply holding it in the position that hurt least and moving on. They walked back toward the operations floor. The room they returned to was different from the room they had left. The red had cleared from most of the screens. The cascade failure alerts were dropping off one by one, replaced by amber caution indicators, then by the ordinary blue-white of standard operational status. Delia Foss was working through system readouts with the focused efficiency of someone on the far side of a crisis. Hale was at his engineering console. He looked up when Ellie walked in. He said it worked. She said, the underlying problem is still there. He looked at her. She said, you stopped the cascade. You did not fix the cause. Your quantum processor timing is still desynchronized. If you bring the environmental sensors back online without correcting the core cooling configuration, you will be back here within 6 to 8 hours. Hale turned back to his console. He ran through something quietly. Then he said, she is right. The timing deviations are still present, Smaller now that the bad sensor data has been removed, but they are there. Wynn had come down from the platform. He stopped in front of Ellie. He said, "You need to see the medic," she said. "After we fix the processor timing," he said. "Miss Carson," she said. "General, you have 6 hours, possibly 8. You can have me looked at in 6 minutes and then we address the actual problem, or you can insist on the medic first and spend the time it takes arguing with me. Your choice." Wynn looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Navarre. Navarre said nothing. He was watching Ellie with an expression that had shifted somewhere in the maintenance corridor and had not shifted back. Wynn said 6 minutes. Medic station? Then back here. That is not a request. She nodded once. She went. Briggs had been standing near the far wall since they returned. He had not spoken. He had watched the screens clear. He had watched Ellie walk back onto the operations floor. He had not moved. Now Wynn looked at him. Briggs said, "I stand by the invocation of Sierra Protocol. Given the information available at the time, it was the correct call." Wynn said, "I know." Briggs said, "And I stand by the security objection." Wynn said, "I know that too." A pause. Wynn said, "Dr. Hale, tell me what we need to do." Hale pulled up the cooling system schematic. He had the expression of someone who has been handed a problem that is simultaneously simpler and harder than expected. Simpler because the diagnosis is clear. Harder because the solution requires undoing decisions made carefully and expensively, and with the full confidence of several qualified people. The core issue, he said, is the cooling upgrade. We optimize for maximum efficiency, lowest energy consumption at the target temperature. But that optimization created very specific pressure and airflow conditions around the processor housing. Those conditions are generating turbulence that the original ventilation system was not designed for. The turbulence affects the environmental sensors. The sensors give fractionally incorrect readings to the quantum clock. The clock drifts. Every system that uses the clock as a reference drifts with it. Wynn said, "How do we fix it?" Hale said, "We need to change the cooling configuration, reduce the precision, run the system at a slightly higher temperature with more consistent pressure dynamics. It will cost us approximately 12% in energy efficiency, but it will eliminate the turbulence." "How long?" Wynn said. 3 hours, maybe 4. "We have 6, Wynn said. "Do it in 4. Ellie came back from the medic station at 12 minutes, not 6. She had a compression wrap on her right wrist and her sleeve pulled down over it. She said nothing about what the medic had told her. She crossed the floor to Hale's station and stood beside him. She said, "The cooling system will not respond the way your model predicts. You are working from a computational model that assumes ideal response times. Physical systems have lag, thermal inertia. The coolant temperature will not change the moment you adjust the setting. The flow will not stabilize the moment you change the pressure. If you run the sequence on the model's timeline, you will be correcting for conditions that no longer exist and missing conditions that have replaced them." Hale said, "We have sensors for real-time monitoring." She said, "You have no sensors. You just disconnected all of them." He stopped. He said, "We cannot bring the sensors back online until the cooling configuration is fixed, because bringing the sensors back online with the old configuration will restart the cascade." She said, "Correct." He said, "So we are running a full system recalibration on a multi-billion-dollar defense installation without any environmental monitoring." She said, "You have people. Your teams have been stationed throughout the facility since the initial alerts. They have been calling in manual readings for the last hour. They know where the hot spots are, where the cool zones are, how the air moves in different sections." She looked at the whiteboard near Navarre's station, where manual temperature readings from across the facility had been logged in columns updated every few minutes in different handwriting. She said, "That is your sensor network." Wynn had come to stand near them. He looked at the whiteboard. He said into the facility communications, "All personnel, this is General Wynn. For the next 2 hours, you are our instruments. You see something, you report it. You feel something, you report it. No reading is too small. No observation is irrelevant. Clear." The affirmatives came back through the speakers, one section at a time, spreading through the facility like water finding its level. Hale divided the recalibration into 12 sequential steps, each with a 60-second interval for manual verification before the next one executed. He looked at Ellie. He said, "I am going to need you to tell me things I cannot calculate." She said, "That is why I am still here." The first 4 intervals went smoothly. Hale adjusted coolant temperature incrementally. The manual teams reported stable readings. The ambient temperature on the primary operations floor held steady. Each interval, Foss logged the verification data and called the next step green. Interval 5 was not smooth. From a station near the secondary processor housing, a voice came through command. We are showing temperature rise in the Northeast Equipment Corridor, 2 degrees in 30 seconds. Hale's hands froze. His calculations had not predicted that. He said that should not be happening. Ellie said the ceiling height in that section. He looked at her. She said the Northeast Corridor has lower ceiling clearance than the primary processor space. Heat pools differently in confined vertical spaces. You adjusted flow rate uniformly across all zones, but the physical geometry is not uniform. The Northeast section needs compensatory flow to prevent thermal stratification. He said if I increase flow to that zone, I reduce pressure in the adjacent loops. She said only temporarily. The system will equalize. Give it 90 seconds after the adjustment. He made the adjustment. 40 seconds later, temperature stabilizing. Northeast corridor coming back down. Interval 6 was clean. Interval 7 brought an unexpected pressure wave in the east ventilation shaft, the kind that happens when airflow through adjacent systems creates a resonance effect in a shared space. Ellie directed teams to open 3 maintenance access panels, simultaneously providing relief vending that broke the resonance before it could propagate. Hale said, "How did you know that would work?" She said Greenhouse 3 has the same problem at a smaller scale. The East Bay and the Center Bay share a ventilation plenum, and when I adjust airflow in one, the other develops standing pressure waves. I open the roof vents in sequence. Same principle. He said your greenhouse has a shared ventilation plenum. She said my grandfather built it. He was not thinking about resonance harmonics. He was thinking about keeping the tomatoes warm. Hale almost smiled. It was the involuntary kind, the kind that escapes before the person decides whether to allow it. Interval 8. Interval 9. The facility was settling into its corrected configuration the way a structure settles after a long stress. Not suddenly, but steadily, each measurement a fraction closer to baseline than the one before. Then interval 10 arrived. Foss said, "Sir, the quantum processor temperature is spiking. 7 degrees Fahrenheit. 20 seconds and still climbing." Hale's hands stopped moving. On the main display, the temperature curve for the primary processor housing was climbing with the clean, steep trajectory of a real thermal event. Navarre said abort. Hale said, "We cannot abort. We are committed to the sequence. A forced stop now could cause thermal shock to the processor array. Damage from shock could be worse than damage from overheating." He said it steadily, but his hands were not moving. He was staring at the curve. Wynn said, "Options." Hale said, "I do not." Ellie said, "It is not real." Everyone looked at her. She said, "You brought the first environmental sensor back online 30 seconds ago, the Northeast temperature monitor. It is still calibrating against the new cooling parameters. It does not yet have a baseline for what normal looks like under the new configuration. It is reporting what it sees against the old baseline. What it is reading as a 7-degree spike is the new thermal equilibrium, which is different from the old one." Navarre said, "How can you be sure?" She said, "Because if the processor were actually running 7 degrees hot, you would hear it." She said it quietly, matter-of-factly. She said, "Everyone stop. Listen." The room went silent. The quantum processor housing was 30 feet away behind reinforced glass. Under thermal stress, the composite materials in its casing would produce sounds. Small sounds. The particular tick and groan of materials under more load than they were designed for. The room listened. There was nothing. The ordinary hum of the facility, the whisper of filtered air through the reconnected vent in the northwest corner, the faint percussion of someone's boot shifting on the operations floor. No thermal stress sounds. Hale sent a runner to the Northeast temperature station with a handheld thermometer. The runner came back in 90 seconds. Manual reading is nominal, within 1 degree of the target parameters. Foss checked her display. The digital reading had dropped back to normal range while they were listening. She said quietly, "Sensor has completed calibration. Reading baseline reset." Navarre turned and looked at Colonel Briggs. He did not say anything. He simply looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man filing something away carefully. Briggs was looking at the main display. His arms were still crossed. But something in the set of his shoulders had changed almost imperceptibly, the way a fixed structure changes when one of its load-bearing assumptions has been quietly removed. Interval 11 passed without incident. And then they were at interval 12. The final step: reconnect all environmental sensors simultaneously and allow the modified cooling system to assume full operational control. Hale said, "This is it. If the core processor timing issue has been resolved, sensors will come online and report stable conditions. The facility will return to normal operation. If it has not been resolved, we will know within seconds." Wynn said execute. Hale initiated the final sequence. Every screen on the operations floor filled with data simultaneously. The sensor network came back online in a wave reporting temperature, pressure, airflow, the full picture returning after 2 hours of blindness. The room held its breath. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Foss said barely above a whisper. All systems nominal. No timing errors. No data conflicts. No cascading failures. 30 seconds. Navarre Bird, 7 telemetry is clean. No synchronization lag. Bird 3 and Bird 11 reporting normally. 45 seconds. Durin from the radar station ground tracking is stable. No anomalies in western sector. 60 seconds. Hale leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something in his face had changed. Not relief exactly, something quieter than that. The particular expression of an engineer who has watched something he built come back from the edge and is not yet sure whether to be proud or humbled. He said, "It worked." The operations floor exhaled, person by person, in the same way that the silence had spread through them before, each person confirming independently that what Foss had reported was what their own instruments were showing. Wynn stood at the center of it. He looked around at his floor, at his people, at the screens that were blue, again running clean, telling the truth. Then he looked at Ellie Carson. She was standing slightly apart from the activity, the way she had been standing, slightly apart from things since she walked in. Her right arm was at her side. Her expression was not triumph. It was the expression of someone who had been attending to a problem, had helped resolve it, and was now thinking about something else entirely. She was thinking about her father's name on the wall. Wynn walked toward the medic station door. Behind him, the operations floor ran clean and quiet, doing what it had been built to do in the building that Tom Carson had helped design 24 years before his daughter had stood in its maintenance corridor in the dark and finished what he started. Part 3. What good soil looks like. General Garrett Wynn did not knock. The medic station door opened and he stepped in and looked at Ellie Carson sitting on the examination table with her right wrist extended and a corpsman rewrapping it with the focused efficiency of someone who had already done this once and was now doing it correctly. He looked at the wrist. He looked at her face. Her face told him nothing he could easily read, which he was beginning to understand was simply how she was. He said, "How bad?" She said, "Partial ligament tear. Restricted movement for 6 to 8 weeks." He said, "I am sorry." She said, "It works fine with the left hand. Most of what I do works fine with the left hand." He pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down across from her, not standing over her. He sat down the way a person sits when they intend to have a real conversation. The corpsman finished the wrap, told Ellie she needed imaging within 24 hours and left them alone. Wynn said, "I have something to show you first. Before I say what I came in to say." He had a folder, not a tablet, an actual cardboard folder, the kind that had been physically assembled by someone who had decided this information needed to exist as a physical object. He set it on the table beside her. She opened it. It was a report. Delia Foss had compiled it during the final intervals of the recalibration sequence, working from system logs and time-stamped records that the facility's internal audit trail had been generating automatically for weeks. The first 3 pages were technical error propagation timelines, sensor drift data, the signature of the cascade failure traced back to its origin point with the clean backward reading clarity that is only possible after the fact. She read those pages quickly. She understood the shape of it without needing to understand every number. Then she turned to the 4th page. It was a summary of the facility's automated compliance protocols, specifically the protocol triggered when an external environmental complaint was filed with a county office and flagged for federal review. According to the log, when Ellie's complaint had been referred upward 3 weeks ago, the referral had automatically initiated an internal environmental systems audit at Iron Spine. The audit had been assigned to Dr. Hale's team. The audit request had been reviewed and suspended pending completion of the processor expansion project. The suspension had been authorized by Colonel Brett Briggs. The reason given: operational continuity. The expansion timeline was fixed. The audit could follow. Ellie read this page more slowly than the others. She read it the way she read her crop stress documentation in the early mornings, attending not just to what was reported, but to what was not being said. The gap between the data and the reality it was failing to describe. If the audit had not been suspended, it would have identified the cooling system's turbulence effect within 48 hours of initiation. The cascade failure would not have happened. 200 people would not have spent this morning in a facility on the edge of locking down around them. Her wrist would not be wrapped. She set the report down. Wynn said, "You tried to tell us." She looked at the wall. At the middle distance, the way a person looks when they are processing something that requires more space than a single thought. She said, my father tried to build something that would last. He spent 20 years making decisions inside buildings like this one, and most of those decisions I will never know about because that is the nature of the work. But I know he was careful. I know he thought about the thing after the thing, not just whether it would work today, but whether it would still be working in 30 years when someone he had never met was depending on it. She paused. She said, I just came to get my basil back. Wynn sat with that for a moment. He said, I know. He reached into the folder and set a document on the table beside the report. Separate from the folder, facing her, it was a contract. She looked at it without touching it. The header read Department of Defense Civilian Technical Consulting Agreement. Her name was already typed into the contractor line. He had prepared this before she arrived, before he knew whether she would do anything worth contracting for. She found that detail more interesting than the salary figure, which was also notable. Wynn said consulting position. Official clearance at the appropriate level. Quarterly system design reviews. You would work with Hale's team, not for them. Your role would be exactly what you did today, look at what they cannot see because they are too close to it. She said, what I did today was notice that a building sounded wrong. That is not a transferable skill set. That is 40 years of accumulated habit from a family of people who paid attention to physical systems because the alternative was losing everything they built. He said, that is precisely what I am trying to acquire. She looked at the contract. He said, we spend billions of dollars making these systems smarter, faster, more interconnected. And the smarter they get, the harder it becomes to see the simple thing underneath them. Today you showed me that the simple thing underneath them is still the most important thing. I need people who understand that. My engineers are exceptional. They are not exceptional at what you do. She said, what I do is grow plants. He said, what you do is understand systems that cannot be fully controlled. You learn to work with them instead of over them. That is the opposite of everything we train for here, and it is exactly what we needed today. She looked at the contract for a long time. Then she said, my father asked me to promise him something the week before he died. He said that world, the federal work, the clearance buildings, the contracts, he said it took him away from the farm for 15 years, away from my mother, away from me. And he wanted me to promise him I would not let it take me the same way. Wynn said nothing. She said I kept that a promise today and in a way he probably did not intend. I walked into his building and I used everything he taught me to fix something that his building was doing wrong. I am not sure if that is keeping the promise or breaking it. I have been thinking about it since I saw his name on your wall. She looked at Wynn. She said, but I know that signing this contract is not keeping it. This is not my sole general. I respect what happens in this building. I understand now a little better than I did this morning what it costs to keep it running. But my place is in Millbrook Valley. My mother is in Ellensburg. My greenhouses are on a 40-acre property that will stop working correctly in about 6 months if I am not there to watch it. I made him a promise. I kept it differently than I planned. That is enough. She picked up the contract, held it for a moment, set it back down facing him. He looked at it. He said, I had to try. She said, I know. It was the right thing to ask. He stood. He picked up the folder and left the contract on the table, then seemed to reconsider and picked up the contract too. He had the expression of a man who had expected this answer and was not surprised by it, and was also somewhere underneath the professional composure, genuinely disappointed in the real way, the quieter and more durable kind that does not perform itself. He said the investigation into the suspended audit will proceed through standard channels. Colonel Briggs will not face disciplinary action on my recommendation. The decision he made was within his authority and consistent with the information he had. But the record will be complete. She said, that seems right. He said there is one more thing. He had a second document, smaller. He set it beside her on the table. She looked at it. It was an automated security log, time-stamped. The timestamp read 8 minutes after the countdown had appeared on the main display, after Sierra Protocol had been invoked, after Briggs had ordered Ellie to leave the operations floor. The log showed that Colonel Briggs had initiated a facility security hold on Ellie's temporary clearance badge at that timestamp, a hold that would have flagged her for physical detention anywhere in the facility. The hold had been processed by the security system. The security system had been an active lockdown protocol at that timestamp restricting all non-defense functions to preserve operational integrity. The hold had not executed. The system that Briggs trusted to enforce his security decision had been the same system that prevented it from being carried out. The lockdown designed to protect the facility from outside interference had in the space of 30 seconds also protected Ellie from the inside interference that would have stopped her from reaching the junction panel in time. Wynne said, "I am not showing you this to make a point about Colonel Briggs. He was doing his job." She looked at the log. He said, "I am showing you because you should know the full picture. You came here today to file a complaint about your crops. You ended up inside a cascade failure in a classified facility with a detention order active in the system. And the only reason that order did not execute was because the system itself, the same system that was failing, made a decision in that half second that kept you in the corridor long enough to do what you came to do." He let that sit. He said, "Your father built part of this building. You fixed part of this building today. The building in some sense helped." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He would have found that funny." Wynne said, "I think he would have been proud." He left her there. She sat on the examination table with her wrapped wrist resting on her thigh and the security log on the table beside her and the distant sound of the operations floor running clean and steady beyond the door. She thought about a flour sack and a ballpoint pen. She got up and went to get her jacket. Colt Navarre was at the elevator. He had been waiting there, which she suspected was not accidental. He was not a man who ended up places by accident. He was a man who decided where to be and was there when the relevant moment arrived. He said, "Miss Carson," she said, "you can call me Ellie. I think we are past clearance badge formalities." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. The expression of a man who has just updated a fixed opinion and is not yet ready to say so out loud. He said, "I owe you an apology." She said, "For what?" He said, "For doubting you, for thinking," she said, "you were doing your job. You are supposed to be skeptical of unauthorized civilians in a classified facility. The absence of that skepticism would be a problem." He said, "Still," she said, "Captain, when the general told you to come with me to those junction panels, you did not hesitate. Even though you disagreed, even though you thought I might be wrong. You made a decision and you committed to it fully." He said, "That is called following orders." She said, "That is called discipline." They are not the same thing. A lot of people follow orders. Not as many people follow them with the kind of full commitment that makes the difference between a thing working and a thing almost working. You ran that corridor like it mattered. He was quiet for a moment. She pressed the elevator button. He said, "What you said earlier about smart people building systems so complex they cannot see simple problems. Is that really what happened here?" The elevator arrived. She stepped in. She said, "No, Captain. What happened here is that smart people forgot that complexity is not the same as wisdom. A system can be extraordinarily sophisticated and still be wrong about something elementary. That is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of attention." She looked at him through the closing doors. She said, "Pay attention to your building. Not just to what the screens are telling you, to the building itself. It will tell you things the screens do not know how to say." The doors closed. She rode up alone. The drive back to Millbrook Valley took 45 minutes, and she spent most of it in silence. Not because she had nothing to think about. She had more to think about than she usually allowed herself in one stretch. But thinking for Ellie Carson was not primarily a verbal activity. It was the same as observation patient attending to the information that was present rather than the information she wanted to find. The information that was present on the drive home was this. Her father had spent 20 years inside buildings she was not allowed to know about. Doing work she was not allowed to ask him about, building things she would not fully understand until she was standing inside them at 6 in the morning with mud on her boots and a temporary clearance badge on her collar. He had asked her to stay away from all of that. He had asked her in the deliberate way that meant he was transmitting something important, not merely expressing a preference. She had understood that request as protection. Keep the farm, keep the family, stay in the soil that was hers. She understood it differently now. Not as protection from the work, as protection from what the work cost. The 15 years, the Sundays, the gap between the man he was when he was home and the man he became when the contracts called him away, the slightly receded quality of his presence, the way a person is present in body while a portion of their attention remains somewhere else. He had not wanted that for her. She had not given it to him today. She had gone into the building, done what needed doing, and come home. One morning, her wrist would heal slowly. Her mother would worry when she found out, which was unavoidable, but she would be told only as much as was necessary. She had kept the promise in the only way that mattered. She had not let the building keep her. She pulled off Route 97 onto the county road and then onto the gravel track that led to the farm. When the greenhouses came into view, she felt the particular thing she always felt coming back to them. Not sentiment, exactly, something more functional. The recognition of a system she understood. The comfort of a place that made sense to her in the specific way that places make sense when you have spent years learning their rhythms and their failures and their particular ways of being wrong before they are wrong enough to matter. She parked the truck. She went inside to check on her basil. 3 months passed. October became November, cold and clear. The kind of cold that settles into the Cascade foothills like a long intention. November became December. The greenhouses ran well. The crop stress in Greenhouse 3 resolved within 2 weeks of Ellie's visit to Ironspine. The facility had corrected its exhaust configuration as part of the post-incident remediation, and the thermal anomaly that had been reaching her valley disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. She called her mother every Sunday. She did not tell her mother about October. She described the visit to the county office and the resolution of the exhaust issue in 2 sentences, neither of which was false. Her wrist healed slowly. 6 weeks became 8. At 8 weeks, the imaging showed full structural repair, but a small permanent restriction in the flexion range, perhaps 15% of the full arc, a limitation that showed up when she was trying to open a stiff jar lid or grip something at an awkward angle. The physical therapist said most people adapted within a few months and stopped noticing it. She believed him. She also suspected she would notice it for the rest of her life, not because of the limitation, but because of what it reminded her of. Some things become part of the body in ways that go past tissue and tendon. She did not regret it. In the second week of January, Dr. Victor Hale drove 90 minutes east from Spokane in a rented car. He had called ahead, which she appreciated. He arrived at the farm at 10 in the morning in a jacket that was too thin for the temperature and carrying a small bag over one shoulder. She met him at the gate. He said, "I want to learn how you think. Not observe, actually work. There is a difference." She looked at the bag. He opened it. Inside were a pair of work gloves, still packaged, the kind sold in hardware stores for $12. He had bought them specifically for this. She could tell from the newness of the packaging that he had not owned work gloves in some time, or perhaps ever. She looked at the gloves. She looked at him. She said, "Greenhouse 3, the tomatoes need transplanting." "Start there," he said. "I do not know how to transplant tomatoes." She said, "I know. That is why I said start there." He followed her in. She spent the first hours saying very little. She showed him what needed doing and let him attempt it. He was methodical, careful, and completely wrong about several things in sequence, each error following logically from the previous one, in the way that happens when a person applies correct reasoning to incorrect foundational assumptions. He was transplanting the way his training had taught him to approach problems systematically, with attention to the variables he could identify. The plants did not care about his system. They had their own. After the third error, she stopped him. She said, "You are thinking about what you are doing. Stop thinking about what you are doing." He said, "That is not a usable instruction." She said, "Feel the root ball before you move it, not the weight of it, the density, whether it is holding together or whether it wants to fall apart. A root ball that falls apart in your hands is telling you something. It is telling you the transplant is happening too early, or the soil moisture is wrong, or the root system has not developed enough to survive the move." He said, "How do I tell the difference between those 3 things?" She said, "You cannot the first time. The second time you are closer. By the 100th time you know which one it is before you pick it up because you have been paying attention and your hands have learned something your training cannot teach them." He looked at the root ball in his hands. Then he looked at her. He said, "This is what you do with everything." She said, "My grandfather did it first. My father did it next. I am third." He said, "And there is no fourth." She said nothing. He understood from her silence that this was a thing she had thought about. Whether there would be a fourth. Whether the particular kind of knowledge that lived in her hands and in her attention and in accumulated family observation of how physical systems behaved, whether that was a thing that could be passed on or whether it was something more fragile dependent on the specific combination of the place and the people and the patients that had produced it. He went back to the transplanting. He was better on the second row, slower but better. By midday, they had moved to the irrigation check in Greenhouse 5. She showed him how she walked the lines before looking at the moisture monitors, not to replace the monitors, but to give herself a frame for understanding what they were reporting. The monitors measured, she observed. The two together produced a picture that neither produced alone. He asked questions constantly, not about the technology, about the principles. Why does this variety respond this way? What does the color of this leaf tell you? When does the rhythm of the drip rate matter more than the volume measurement? She answered all of them. At one point, standing in the warm, wet air of Greenhouse 5 with a tray of seedlings between them, he said, "I have a proposal. Not a job offer, a collaboration." She said, "I know the difference." He said, "I want to bring my engineering team here. Quarterly. Let them spend time in this environment doing what I am doing today. Let them learn the kind of attention you practice. I believe it will change how they think about the systems they build, not replace their technical knowledge. Give it something to stand on." She said, "They will not like it." He said, "Some of them will hate it." She said, "The ones who hate it need it most." He said, "That is what I thought." She looked at the seedlings. She thought about what her father would have made of this conversation, an engineer from a classified military facility, standing in her greenhouse holding a root ball, asking to be taught something he did not have language for. She thought he would have found it gratifying in a way he would not have expressed directly. He had not been a person who expressed things directly when an indirect expression was more honest. She said, "On one condition." He said, "Name it." She said, "They work. They do not observe and take notes and analyze. They pick things up and plant things and make mistakes and start over. They learn the way learning actually happens, through the hands and the attention, not through watching." He said, "Some of them will genuinely not know how to do that." She said, "I know. That is the point." He extended his hand. She shook it with her left hand because her right was still holding a seedling that was not ready to be set down. He noticed the wrist. He said nothing about it, which was the right thing to do. The greenhouses ran through January, through February. The tomatoes in Greenhouse 3 came in ahead of schedule, which she attributed partly to the correction of the exhaust anomaly and partly to the transplanting she had done in October, when her wrist was still taped and she had done most of the work left-handed and slower than usual, and with more attention than usual because the slower pace required it. Attention was a renewable resource if you managed it correctly. She had learned this young. In the third week of February, on a Thursday afternoon when the light through the greenhouse glass had the particular low flat quality of late winter light in the Pacific Northwest, she was walking Greenhouse 3 alone, not for any specific purpose. This was the part of the day she kept for walking. No tablet, no monitoring system, no alerts. Just the building and the plants in the rhythm of a system she understood well enough to feel when it was right. It was right. She stopped in front of the basil section. The same plants that had shown stress indicators 6 weeks before her drive to Iron Spine. They were running well now. The leaf color was correct. The growth rate was slightly ahead of the seasonal projection. The roots, when she pressed 2 fingers into the growing medium, felt dense and settled. She stood in the warm air and listened. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it without expectation. A number she did not have saved. Washington, D.C. area code. The message was brief. It read, "Different facility, Oregon. Ventilation anomaly identified in preliminary inspection. Same symptom profile. Engineers cannot isolate the cause." When she read it twice. She looked at the basil. She thought about what it would mean to say no. She had said no to the contract. She had come home. She had kept her end. Her wrist was still healing, and she had not mentioned it to her mother, and the crop schedules were running well, and there was no structural reason to walk back into a classified facility 4 months after she had told a general that it was not her soil. She thought about her father's voice, the specific tone it took on when he was about to drive away from the farm on a Sunday evening for another contract. Not regret, not apology. The quieter thing underneath those. The recognition of a pull that was not obligation and not desire, but something more like vocation. The particular call of a problem that only you can hear, because only you know how to listen for it. A building somewhere in Oregon was producing the wrong sound. She was possibly the only person who would recognize it as wrong before it became something worse. She typed a reply. She typed, "Send me the ventilation specs." She put the phone in her pocket. She knelt down in front of the basil and pressed her fingers into the growing medium, the good hand, the one that moved freely, the one that had not paid the price in October. She checked the moisture. She checked the density. She checked the particular quality of the root structure that told her not through any measurement she could articulate whether the plants were doing what healthy plants did. They were. She stood up. The greenhouse hummed around her. Temperature, humidity. The whisper of filtered air through the overhead vents. The slow drip of the irrigation system. The steady rhythm of 40,000 square feet of controlled environment running the way it was built to run. It was a sound she had been hearing her entire life and had stopped hearing as a sound long ago. It had become the baseline, the thing against which other things were measured. She walked the length of the basil row and turned at the end and walked back. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She did not take it out. She knew what it would be. The ventilation specs would come through as a file. She would look at them tonight at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the reading light her father had installed above the table years ago. The one that was slightly too bright for a kitchen, but exactly right for reading technical documents and crop reports, and the kind of correspondence that required full attention. She would look at the specs and she would look for the same thing she always looked for. Not the system itself, not the numbers, the gap between what the system was designed to do and what the physical principles underneath it were actually doing. The place where the logic of the design met the reality of how air moved and heat transferred and pressure equalized in the specific physical space where the system lived. Buildings did not lie. Her father had told her that when she was small enough that she had not fully understood what a lie was, and old enough that she had understood completely. He had said it the way he said things he believed without reservation, simply without emphasis, the way you state a fact that does not require defense because it has never been wrong. She thought she understood now more fully than she had before October what he had meant. An instrument measures, a reading reports, a model predicts. All of these are representations, and representations carry the assumptions of the people who built them, and assumptions have edges, and at the edges there are blind spots. What lived beyond the edges was not unknowable. It required a different kind of knowing, the kind that lived in the hands and in the attention and in the accumulated habit of a family that had spent 3 generations watching physical systems the way other families watch the news closely regularly, with the understanding that the information coming through was not the whole truth, but was the best available approximation, and that the gap between the approximation and the truth was where the real work happened. Her grandfather had known this. Her father had known it. He had spent 20 years trying to build it into systems that would outlast him. She thought about the flour sack drawing, about how he had held the pen carefully making the lines precise, naming each junction, explaining each decision. Not because a 12-year-old needed to understand federal facility ventilation design, because he was proud of it, because he had built something good and he wanted someone to know it. She had known it. She had known it in the dark in a corridor 40 feet long with a countdown she could not see and a wrist that was already wrong and no instruments and no data and nothing but the memory of a Sunday afternoon and a man she missed every day. The greenhouse was warm around her. She reached the end of the basil row and did not turn back. She walked to the main building and washed her hands. She put water on for coffee. She sat down at the kitchen table under the reading light. She waited for the file. Outside February held the valley in its cold, flat light. The greenhouses stood against the dusk glass, catching the last of it, the way they had caught the light every evening for as long as she could remember. Her grandfather's work, her father's improvements, her maintenance, her attention, her seasons. Her phone buzzed. The file had arrived. She set down her coffee. She opened the file. She began to read. The first page showed a ventilation schematic for a facility in the Willamette Valley 60 miles south of Portland. Federal installation, no address on the document header. The system design was different from iron spine, different geometry, different load distribution, different age. But the symptom pattern in the accompanying notes was familiar in the way that certain problems are always familiar once you have seen them enough times. Something had changed 6 weeks ago. Something was wrong with the air. She read slowly with the kind of attention that was not urgency and not analysis, but the older and quieter discipline of a person letting a building tell her what it needed. Somewhere in Oregon, a building that did not know she existed was already making the sound she had learned to hear. It was the wrong sound. She turned the page and kept reading.